could do with that kind of money?
We're not going to rob the money train.
Why not?
Because we're cops.
Charlie is going down, and you are the only family that he's got.
He was attacked somewhere and brought here to die, and it probably wasn't by armed robbers. Don't you get it? He was shot and brought here to die.
And what difference does that make for the love of Christ? The more reason we should take the money and go now.
Check it out. Straight out of the ghetto. None of the Beverly Hills are flush of metal. Yep, I made it this far and had to gamble, scramble, pedal. Ain't no shame in my game, man. I came through like a thoroughbred.
Take a look at
but still this.
Who have this car?
It's mine.
It's your own. Autobiography, latest model.
Bad guys. Soft work.
We're adding new titles every day to our awesome collection of blockbuster movies. Download the app and subscribe. This isn't just a streaming channel. This is a bold new world of entertainment. Arise Play. Beyond streaming.
It's the trial that has gripped a nation. Nnamdi Kanu, the controversial Nigerian separatist leader, is back in court over charges of terrorism and treason. And now, with amended charges brought against the leader, new interest in the case is at a fever pitch. So what next for the pro-Biafran leader? We'll get an inside look at the trial from one of Kanu's lawyers and counselors. Also on the program, the crisis that broke out in Nigeria, known as the NSAS protests, is a year old this week. This protest sparked one of the biggest social justice movements that Nigeria and the continent has ever seen. But perhaps the most distinctive characteristic of the demonstrations was the prominence of young women fundraising to sustain the movement's efforts and working tirelessly to steer the mobilization. I'll be joined by one of the female organizers of the protest in the capital, Abuja. Plus, he's remembered in death as he was in life, a controversial, domineering figure in Libyan and world politics. But 10 years after the death of Muammar Gaddafi at the hands of Libyan rebels, we ask how far has Libya come in shedding the influence of its revolutionary leader? And with the rise of terrorism and authoritarian rule in the Sahel and across the region, is the leader's brand of politics, seen in suicide bombings and targeted killings, here to stay? I'll speak to an African affairs analyst on the 10th anniversary of Gaddafi's death. I'm Somna Sambo, and this is the Arise interview. Begin with the resumption of the trial of separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu here in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Kanu, who is the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, pleaded not guilty to charges of terrorism, treason, running an illegal company and publishing defamatory materials. The case has been adjourned until the 10th of November. Various routes leading to the Federal High Court were blocked by security agents ahead of his appearance. Security personnel prevented some lawyers and journalists from entering the court.
The Attorney General of the Federation served us with amended charge, 7-count charge, yesterday, because the one they served us on 14th of October, they amended it again. But they are, so they served us with amended charge yesterday. But after studying the charge, we come to a conclusion that the charge is worthless and empty. So we have filed an application challenging the competency of the charge and the jurisdiction of the court to continue hearing this case. So, and today, our client took plea to the 7-count amended charge. And the matter now adjourned to 10th of November for hearing of application challenging the competence and jurisdiction of the court to hear the case. Because we are of the view, firm view, that the 7-count offense charge preferred against our client did not disclose any offense. So I can't see where somebody will sneeze in London and it become an offense triable in this country.
Well, Nnamdi Kanu's lawyers, Ifeanyi Ejiofor, Ambrose Fine, are with me in the studio. Good to have you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Sani.
Well, let's start with you. I mean, Ejiofor, it's a usual scenario like this, and you should have been used to it right now, that whenever you have this case, I mean, your fellow lawyers are pushed aside, and then the court becomes so busy that even other court cases don't seem to hold very well. And there's been this allegation that, you know, a lot of the powers vested in the judiciary is being waned because of this trial of your client. What do you have to say, first of all, when you see other lawyers not being given the opportunity to get into the court just because of your case?
Thank you so much. It's actually a strange development. We're not familiar with that. 2017, 2016, 2017, we passed through this hurdle. I know what happened. I don't know why they're making heavy word about it. More especially when there's nothing before the court for him to, in the first place, be tried upon. So they are kind of dramatizing the entire thing. I said it yesterday in my press interview that the charge being preferred against Nnamdi Kanu, my client, I understand. I don't want to go into the competence of the charge at this level, at this stage, because it's worthless. So, but it's just like every normal charge. Normal charge can prefer against anybody, any person, whether the person committed an offense in the usual style. They will file frivolous charge against people once probably the establishment perceive you as somebody who they are not comfortable with. They file a charge, regardless of how worthless it is. So we've been seeing such things. People who have been accused of serious offenses in court, even in Federal High Court, we've not seen such security presence in court. And it's going bad. It has going to a messy level because now lawyers are being denied access to court. The court is only constituency where lawyers belong. So I was I was troubled today when I saw it. I confronted the security. I was talked to people who are the head of the people managing the situation.
Yeah, the court authorities.
The court authorities and also security agents, personnel who were in charge. I talked to them. And I expressed my reservation about what they are doing, and I know lawyers will take it off from there because they are going to most likely report this development to the NBA chairman, NBA president. So, and also but more trouble is the fact that the journalists are also being denied access to the court because
pretty difficult for a lot of
because in the course of the proceedings,
and the information we have is that no journalist was allowed to get directly into the courtroom.
Sure, because even his lordship at some point was asking about journalists whether they're in court because they want to pass a message to them. And I told my lord they are not here. So you see, I don't know whether they want to try my client in secret, which is very, very, very impossible. So it can't.
All right, let's bring in Bruce Fine here. How glad are you to actually see your client in court, being given an opportunity to defend himself, and then with the charges being amended, and then he pleaded not guilty?
Well, I don't know whether I would describe my motion as elated. There are irregularities here. I'm coming from the United States. There's no way the government could change the charge at the 11th hour without having an opportunity to respond to the new allegations. Moreover, under international law in the United States, there's a constitutional right for journalists to attend because it creates a kind of pressure by putting sunshine against corruption or intimidation and things of that sort. Not only does the press have every ordinary citizen has the right, as long as there's room, to sit in a courtroom.
Yeah,
so it's rather
do you still intend to go ahead with your petition to the UN on
this? I had filed
allegations you had said.
That is correct.
Yesterday.
Before I arrived in Abuja, I traveled to Geneva, Switzerland, where there's a working group on arbitrary detention. It's part of the UN Human Rights Council. And based upon what transpired today, I have additional information that I will present to them, seeking an adjudication that the detention of Nnamdi Kanu is illegal under international law. And of course, the Nigerian Constitution also has free speech provisions in it. It's Article 39. I think that what happened today is a violation of Article 39. The media has its right, given room to attend.
Very interesting submission you've got there. Now let's talk about your decision to actually request for Nnamdi Kanu to be transferred to a correctional center. And the judge went ahead to actually said he should be taken back to the DSS facility. Don't you think it is for his own protection that the judge keeps insisting that he should be kept in the DSS facility and not the correctional center?
Well, actually, we have expressed our kind of our difficult impediment in having free access, unimpeded access to our client. During the period, he has been detained in SSS before today. So, and of course, we are aware at some point my colleagues were harassed by molested.
But you still had access to him.
No, but no. The point is that let me just clear this part. The point is that this is a person who's being accused of committing an offense. So, regardless of the fact as to the nature of the offense or the empty nature of the offense or the worthless nature of the offense, the fact is that he supposed to have unimpeded access to his lawyers,
which the authorities have been given to you, because apart from the earlier denials you had made that they were not allowing you to have access to him, you have been having access to him after the last court sitting.
No, I'm coming. Having access is a different thing in this scenario, because we have a situation whereby lawyers at some point were subjected to certain forms of treatment, which will complain to the court and make the public. So, but at some point they changed their approach. So, but what I'm saying is that we need to, assuming he's going into trial, which I know he's not going to be tried because there's no offense before the court, he hasn't committed any offense.
Oh, well,
so
that is subject to what the court is going to say.
He's going to trial. We're supposed to see him regularly, discuss with him, and just exchange facts and information with him. Let him know what's happening. And we're not supposed to do that under atmosphere of fear or intimidation of any form.
Okay, very interesting. We don't have enough time left. Bruce, let's talk about the earlier extraordinary rendition that was done. You still are taking the Nigerian government before the human rights authorities for that extraordinary rendition?
Well, that makes the detention illegal, in part, aside from other violations. But surely under any kind of due process, it's totally illegal to kidnap someone, take them without any hearing whatsoever.
Well, the authorities haven't said they kidnapped him.
Well, they said that they have acted in collusion with the Interpol. What they haven't said is that there was any hearing that enabled Nnamdi Kanu to dispute any of the allegations of crime. And
that's why he's been brought before a judge.
No, but you have to be before a judge before you're kidnapped, not afterwards. The law is very clear on that score. Okay. And he was not given any hearing before they took him here. Indeed, 4 of the 7 counts that are now lodged against him, they weren't even lodged until after he had departed Kenya and was in Nigeria. They couldn't have even been part of an extradition proceeding because they hadn't been alleged.
Confirmed if he was actually arrested in Kenya. But as we try to round off this conversation, you have a 5 billion naira suit against the federal government in trying to enforce its rights. How far has that case gone?
Of course, in their style, an application has been filed, and they will leave it take time. Towards the 11th hour, they will file an application for extension of time within which to enter appearance, and that has been done. So it's coming up on November 2nd for full hearing of the case. And as stands now, the federal government has not responded. They are only chasing time, looking for time to file their response. What they file in court is an application for extension of time within which for them to file a counter affidavit to the information before the court. They've not filed anything. That has been their usual side.
Okay, very interesting. As we try to round off very quickly, do you think that Nnamdi Kanu being brought to court today has doused tension following earlier allegations that, he was...
Reasonably, our people have seen him today. And because now I've kept on explaining, telling them all sorts of things for them to understand. At some point they said, no, Geoffrey, you're no longer coming out clean. We want to see him with our 2 naked eyes. But today they saw him. So, but the point is that not only seeing him, we are demanding for his unconditional release because he has not committed any offense to the law. That's why we filed that objection.
Well, that's
and I'm of the view that once the had and
what will happen in the
courtroom and go back home.
All right, we must thank you, Ifeanyi Ejiofor, and Bruce Fine for joining us to actually take a look at this court case that has drawn a lot of attention within Nigeria and outside Nigeria on the trial of Nnamdi Kanu, the separatist leader of the independent people of Biafra. Well, we'll continue this conversation. There's still more ahead when we come, including the 10th anniversary of Muammar Gaddafi's death and Libya, which is still in a state of crisis. Stay ahead with us.
One planet, our world.
200 countries, 500 cities of over 1 million.
8 billion people with your own story every day, every news day. We make sense of all the noise because you need to know what's important for you, your family, your business, and how it affects your story. Breaking news, the top stories,
all the sports updates as they come in,
and the very latest entertainment news from Nigeria and the world. Our stories are your story.
From our headquarters in Lagos, Arise Newsday for 3 hours every day.
Make every day a news day.
Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Sumner Sambo. No one can deny that Muammar Gaddafi was a controversial figure that sparked much debate about African leadership and the limits of authoritarianism. Whether or not Libya has been able to move past authoritarian rule and forgo suicide bombings and targeted killings for more democratic principles is up for debate. As terrorism and insecurity in the Sahel and across the continent grows, the North African country is still struggling to rectify deep historic divides. On the 10th anniversary of Gaddafi's death, we take a look at how far the Libyan nation has come. To help us analyze Gaddafi's legacy and the current state of affairs in Libya, as well as the spread of terrorism in the North African and Sahel region, I have here with me in the studio the UK-based international defense and security analyst, David Otto. Glad to have you again, David.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here in Nigeria.
Yes.
Well, 10 years after Gaddafi, I mean, lots of reminiscences, a lot of Libyans actually saying that, look, they missed that period, that golden period when Gaddafi was alive. And it's been a mixed reactions for some, while some are also saying that they cherish the freedom of speech that they have now, although their pockets are empty. What's your view on that?
I think there is a huge divide. As you rightly said, we 10 years, the 10th decade anniversary since Muammar Gaddafi, that scene of him being killed, you know, which was a you know, precursor to the so-called you know, the revolution that, you know, took swept across North Africa. I think what we've seen very much is the decline rather than a progress, because obviously the hope was that Libya would have some democracy after Gaddafi, and also stability. I mean, that is perhaps what it was sold as a narrative by France and the NATO forces that helped Libyans to overthrow and assassinate Gaddafi. But what we've seen after 10 years is that perhaps Libya regressed the 42 years before Gaddafi came to power, whereby you've got a situation which is far more worse. There is no democracy, as you know. You know, you've got different governments, government of national accord being supported by the UN. You've got the Libyan National Army by you know, General Khalifa Haftar, and then of course now you have the unity government, which, you know, seems to be the interim or transitional government preparing for the elections. But that is just the official you know, platforms. You know, you still have, you know, terrorists, you know, from Al Qaeda and ISIS, you know, taking territory. You've got militias, you know, who are responsible for all sorts of, you know, malaise within the country. Then you have tribes fighting against each other for power. So Libya is in total chaos, and nationally there is no stability. Regionally, you've seen the outflux of, you know, terrorism from Libya onto the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, the Tako-Goma region, even as far as Nigeria, where, you know, you've got ISIS networks, you know, working together with Islamic State.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting development you've painted here.
Yeah.
A lot of people who do not know Muammar Gaddafi will be interested in knowing the sort of leader that he was. Just use your African lens to help us understand the kind of leader he was, irrespective of the way the West painted him.
I think Muammar Gaddafi was a good example of culture eats strategy for breakfast. He knew very well how diverse and how complicated and complex the Libyan society is. It's ruled by tribes and factions, and he had a very good hold of how to put these groups together. Now, albeit the fact that it was described by many as a dictatorial way of running the country, which no one can dispute. But what Gaddafi did during his years was to bring unity, and he was looking further than just Libya. He was looking at bringing unity towards Africa. He was looking at bringing unity towards the region. So this is somebody who understood the mindset of Libyans. He understood the mindset of the various traditional factions and that exist within the Libyan society.
Yeah, I mean, because in my research, I discovered that there are about 140 tribes.
Yes.
With many of these cultures never having anything to relate with each other over the past.
Yes.
But in 1969, when Gaddafi came into power, he made it a conscious effort to try to unify all these tribal warlords into one and drive a nation that will have very good economic and human development indices. And there's that debate if he actually achieved a lot of that human development indices or not.
That is where the Western strategy of taking out Gaddafi did not consider. What they thought, just like they did in Afghanistan, was we get in there, we introduce democracy, we take out the leader, and then kind of a regime change, and everything is going to be very smooth. But what they failed to understand was that Libya has its specificities in terms of its culture, in terms of the various tribes. Now, they did not really, Gaddafi did not succeed to unify all the tribes, but a huge majority of the tribes, had their interest being looked after. The Libyans had various amenities. They had free education. There are things which, if you look at what we describe as the last known good, that is, before the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, a lot of Libyans that I speak to today are regretting the fact that they had believed, being sold this narrative that somehow, democracy was suitable. But what they failed to understand was that, Libya is a tribal society, and where you do not have a personality like Muammar Gaddafi that can unify the country, then you've got a problem. And this is where the issue is, and is spreading across, Africa.
Yeah, and we'll keep wondering, people like Khalifa Haftar, who used to be with Gaddafi and eventually broke away from Gaddafi, was trying to present himself as a leader in the mold of Gaddafi after his exit.
Perfect.
Why do you think he failed to actually win over the hearts and minds of Libyans, and he's just been restricted to the east of the country?
Now, the biggest problem that General Haftar has, the self-proclaimed general has had, using his platform, the Libyan National Army, is that he has some of the national support. He doesn't have the support of the tribes, and most of the most powerful tribes. The Gaddafi tribe is one of them. There are so many powerful tribes that do exist within Libya. He doesn't have the support of that. Now, that is made worse by the factions that are in support of the government of the National Accord, which also doesn't have the national support, but has the international backing. So you've got two main factions, one which is supported internationally, doesn't have the local support, one which has some of the local support, doesn't have the international backing. So it's a scenario of looking for a third party, and that is why many have talked about the son of Muammar Gaddafi, Dr. Saif Islam Gaddafi, that he could unite both factions. But the international community has labeled him as, an unwanted person or a terrorist or whatever titles they've, given to him. And that makes it very difficult for him to come into the picture. Now, I'm not saying that we're looking at a monarchy where son succeeds father. But what we're talking about here is somebody who understands the culture and strategy to rule Libya.
Very interesting indeed. And we'll be talking about Gaddafi's dreams for United Africa when we come back, because he had proposed the United States of Africa and all of that. But just quickly, as we try to see Libya draw up a united country, do you think that the proposed elections in the December would actually hold?
Now,
just very quickly.
Of course, yes, elections have always been proposed. This is not the first time that it's failed. What I've often said is elections are not a solution to the division that Libya is going through. So it's not as if you bring elections, then everything's going to be fine. What you need to do is, first of all, ensure that you can unite the country, then come to elections.
Okay, very interesting indeed. You're still watching the Rise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we continue our chat with African Affairs analyst David Otto against the backdrop of the 10-year anniversary of Muammar Gaddafi's death. Stay with us.
Knowledge is power. Information is currency. Trust us to tell you what you need to hear. Welcome to the program. You're with Arise News in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Breaking news, exclusive interviews, unrivaled analysis. It's you, the audience, who drives our agenda. We tell the stories that inform you, the stories that are important to you, and the stories that are about you. We are not every news channel. We are Arise News. Welcome back to the Arise interview.
Now, 10 years since the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was killed by rebels, the nation is still struggling to emerge from the violence sparked by his overthrow. Some analysts say violence in Libya has worsened over the years and has spread to other North African countries and nations in the Sahel. There's also the unsettling rise of terrorist groups in the region, with Boko Haram and ISWAP causing insecurity in Nigeria, as well as increasing violence in Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. And the African Affairs analyst David Otto is still with me in the studio to speak further on these developments. Thanks, David, for still being with us here. And I would want to start this segment with, that idea of Gaddafi actually trying to build a United States of Africa before it crumbled, and then we've seen, especially the Sahel region, in crumble since his death. Tell us something about that.
I think what Gaddafi wanted to do is what most African leaders that have passion, for the unity of Africa, the Kwame Nkrumahs had talked about. He wanted to develop a one Africa system whereby, all the African countries, so some kind of, the United States of Africa. And in order for him to do that, he understood that, of course, there were, diverse opinions, throughout the continent as to whether that was going to be a possible strategy. But Gaddafi had the funds, he had the structural, program in mind, and that was a threat to the, to the Western countries. The United States of America, for example, did not, want to see an Africa that is united. So many
especially
Western countries.
Especially under Gaddafi.
Yes, under a Gaddafi. So this was where Gaddafi's problems, were triggered in terms of him being deposed, and this is something which I think it's very difficult to achieve, taking into context.
Well, but he had already started that. He first started by building Libya into a model country,
of course,
with very good human and development indices.
Yes.
And I just want to say, state something. The United Nations has sometime in 2010, I had read, where they had actually said that the human development indices in that country was one of the highest in the world. And after building that model society in Libya, now he used Libyan wealth to actually invest in other countries. I mean, I've been to other countries within the West African sub-region, and you see his footprints. Like in Mali, he built hotels, bridges, and all of that. In Chad, he helped build certain infrastructure there, but also supporting separatist movements in some areas. And in Nigeria, he also supported certain groups. And then at a point in time, you will now hear him saying that Nigeria should be broken into tribal and ethnic lines. And that cost him much. He lost a lot of alliances. And eventually, when the West came for him, there was no one to support his ambition. Do you think he was too ambitious?
I think, Muammar Gaddafi was the good, the bad, and the ugly. So he had very good plans for Africa. At the same time, he had his own personal opinion in terms of how different African states, were, dealing with, maybe groups that wanted separation and all that. What I think is important, for us to look at now is the impact that the taking out of Gaddafi. He said it himself. I was coming to that. That once he's taken out, there will be instability in the region, and
not
just in the region.
That's what has happened.
But also, what we see, Libya it is placed in a very strategic position. It protects that boundary between Europe and then North Africa, but then also the Sahel. So what we have now, as he had predicted, and his son had said the same, is Europe being worried about the migration issues, smuggling of humans and drugs. Come towards the Sahel, you've got terrorists, raining terror within the Malian side, within Burkina Faso, Chad, right up to Nigeria and the rest. And then within Libya itself, you still have that chaos, within the country. So whether you look at it from a national point of view, from the Libyan perspective, or from the international perspective, which is the European countries, or from the African perspective, nobody has gained from the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. He may have had his vices, which we do recognize, but I think what he thought about the stability of Africa was also going to have a positive impact on the European countries. But what Europe did not want was a united Africa by Gaddafi.
Yeah, and let's talk about how his death led to the proliferation of small arms and light weapons across the region, especially in West Africa. We've seen that route coming all the way from Libya down to Mali and all of that down to Nigeria and destabilizing these economies. A lot of this has even led to assassination of some presidents. You could see, for example, the Chadian leader being taken away and all of that. Tell us how much that is a problem within the sub-region.
Now, the premise of that is wherever you destabilize any nation, you would have proliferation of small arms and heavy weapons, moving from one area to another. You've seen the same case with when the Americans were withdrawing from Afghanistan, what that meant. So with the overthrow of Gaddafi and the instability that followed from there, of course, NATO did not have a plan in terms of what they wanted to do after Gaddafi. France did not have a plan. And what made it worse was that Gaddafi had the backing of the Azawad region, and some of these tribes in the northern part of Mali. Some of these tribes helped him to fight against his opponents. But once he had been overthrown, all this, the Azawad region decided to, okay, let's take all these arms and cross over to Mali and see if we can create what they call the movement, the National Movement for the Liberation of the Azawad, the MNLA. So you had that flow of weapons, and then it was made worse by, okay, France said we would introduce Operation Bakin to chase them away, and then it became worse. Jihadists came into the play. So Libya's instability has exposed this idea of regime change. That, okay, because we don't like how a leader's policies are, and we do not want him to be plucked out. He should be plucked out, and we institute some artificial system which we can back in the hope that it will some way.
And that takes me actually to the politics of foreign intervention, especially the Western powers. You could actually see Russia and France and all of that supporting Khalifa Haftar, and then you could see the Tripoli-based government, almost collapsing at a point in time because they weren't getting much support. Eventually, they got some support, and then you could see this interregional war that's ongoing there. Just tell us about it, especially the involvement of Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and all of that.
Yeah, so all these, various factions support one group or the other. As you rightly mentioned, Turkey, supports the government of national accord, and then Khalifa Haftar is supported by the UAE. Now, where there is chaos, there is opportunity. Libya has been a very rich country, as we know, in terms of resources. I mean, people talk of oil. Now, somebody is going to say oil is no longer relevant. It is still relevant as we speak. It was relevant when he was taken out of power. So there has been a scramble for geopolitical positions. There's been proxy wars being taking place within Libya itself, as you rightly said. So all this is as a result of this idea of regime change, which of course we saw the same being replicated in countries like Syria. But I think the key point, which Africans have to really understand, is the fact that as long as we continue to support the Western intervention within Africa, whether they have, because there is always this narrative that has been created. We're coming because we want to remove a dictator who has been there for years. There is no human rights. But what we end up with at the end of the day is still a system which is worse than what we thought we were trying to create.
And there's been a lot of regret on the intervention in Libya, starting from the United States. Barack Obama has said that the intervention there and the death of Gaddafi will actually bring peace, democracy, and all of that. But we haven't seen that happening.
But I think
you could see what happened in Benghazi, and then you could see the French, even the Russians. I mean, it's all looking like a mess.
I think that, all these statements that the US makes, the UN, about this is a mess. These are just rhetorics. The problem is still there. What have you done to resolve the problem? Now, I think there is a deliberate attempt by these very huge powers, to allow the Sahel region to continue to be unstable, and then somehow find their ways and position themselves, within the region. See what is happening in Mali, where the French are clashing with the Russian interest in that region, because now the French are being threatened by the involvement of Russia. They say the Wagner group is there. I mean, and all that. The United States is also there. The UK is there. So all this talk of, we issuing strong languages, as the UN always does, doesn't actually help. What I think will help is them giving the ability for Libyans to be able to come up with something much more concrete.
As we try to round off this conversation, a lot of persons have said that Gaddafi made a model use of oil phones to build a very viral society that was accessible to all and helpful to all with a lot of social benefits. Tell us about that.
I think what Gaddafi did, again, as you said, was he understood not just what Libyans needed in order to keep Libya stable. He made sure that the social system, the health system, the economy was very powerful. He distributed wealth in such a way that, of course, there is no country that no matter what you do, you wouldn't have opposition. He did have opposition within some tribes, but he understood the dynamics of the country. Now, what he did not understand was that, irrespective of, how much you have, you want to please the Western countries, they would always not want to see an African country that is stable, an African country that has a leader who wants to see a United States of Africa. So what I think is, the African Union has to wake up. They have to take responsibility and place Libya into the hands of Libyans rather than international organizations.
As Libya heads for elections.
If it heads for elections.
Yeah, in December, we've seen lots of foreign support coming in again from France. There's a summit scheduled for next month in France, and all these powers are actually saying that they are supporting Libya to ensure that there's a return to democracy. Do you think that other African leaders are playing enough role to ensure that Libya becomes united under a democratic government?
I think most African countries have, sat on their hands, when it comes to the situation in Libya. And I can guarantee you that elections themselves cannot be sustainable in a country that is so much divided.
Yeah, but they just have to start from somewhere.
If one faction,
and considering the devastation that has happened because of a failure of a centralized government that's democratic in Libya, I think it's in the interest of all African countries to support a Libyan government.
Where they want to, where they should start is find a way of uniting Libyans rather than find a way of getting one faction to win an election, which is going to be disputed by another. So African countries have to come up with an African strategy, bringing Libya on board. It shouldn't be some kind of a strategy that is sponsored by the Western countries, because Libyans will know that it is still not in the interest of Libyans, and it wouldn't be in the interest of Africans either.
Well, there's no way you can push away Western interests from that country as long as they still have oil. David Otto, an African affairs analyst, we must thank you so much for joining us to take a critical look at the 10th year anniversary marking the death of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. You're still watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, including we take the time to highlight the women behind the biggest youth-led movement to hit Nigeria. Stay with us.
One planet, our world.
200 countries, 500 cities of over 1 million.
8 billion people with your own story every day, every news day. We make sense of all the noise because you need to know what's important for you, your family, your business, and how it affects your story. Breaking news, the top stories,
all the sports updates as they come in,
and the very latest entertainment news from Nigeria and the world. Our stories are your story.
From our headquarters in Lagos, Arise Newsday for 3 hours every day.
Make every day a news day.
Welcome back to the Arise interview. Now, a year ago, the NSAS demonstrations garnered international attention for its call to end police brutality and bad governance in Nigeria. The images that have come to define the movement show young people taking to the streets while demanding an end to injustice, with celebrities from Nigeria and the diaspora praising their efforts. But history has taught us that every movement has its unsung heroes. Those people working tirelessly in the background, sustaining the movement long after the cameras leave. Female organizers were prominent in steering and fundraising for this prolific global movement. They were the leaders and strategists harnessing social media to fight for change.
On October 3rd, 2020, a video reportedly showing SARS officers killing a young man in Delta State, southern Nigeria, went viral. In response, demonstrations across major cities begin, demanding accountability for the death of another person at the hands of the police. At the same time, even more Nigerians take to social media to voice their frustration on police brutality in Nigeria, as the hashtag #EndSARS tops the global trends on Twitter. A few days later, the protests continued growing momentum as hundreds of youths gathered around Lagos and other parts of Nigeria. In Lekki, Nigerian artists including Falz and Runtown kicked off the protest. Over in Ikeja, demonstrators were led by Rinu Oduala, Temitope Majekodumi, and Mr. Macaroni, some of who slept in front of the Lagos government house overnight. In the capital Abuja, protesters vowed not to leave the premises of the Nigerian Police Force headquarters until the Inspector General of Police addressed them.
I think a feeling of exhaustion, a feeling of just being tired, probably a shared feeling. I think it was something everyone felt at the time. A feeling of frustration, a feeling of vex, a feeling of, come on man, it's getting too way out of hand, That was why I said on that day I would, take that walk along with several other Nigerians. I didn't know how many people were going to come out, maybe 50, maybe 100 people, but, we got there on that day, there were thousands of people on the streets, and of course Runtown had shared a tweet prior to that as well, so, both of us were pretty much at the forefront of that very first walk, and from that, it was like a chain reaction, everything just started to spiral out of control, if you like.
Well, my next guest helped provide relief and care for victims of NSAS in the aftermath of the protests. Vanessa Adebayo is an organizer and the founder of Africa's Mental Health Matters, an organization that brings awareness to mental health amongst the youth in Africa. Nankwa Dakum Mbi founder of Shift Nigeria, which builds support for transformative leaders in communities across Nigeria. And I welcome you to the show. Let's start with you, Vanessa. Mental health is very important, and during that period, a lot of Nigerian youth actually seem to have lost their sanity because of police brutality. They couldn't hold it back again. Just take us through the mental torture that led to the provocative NSAS protests.
Yeah, so I think that during that period, there was already so much leading up to NSARS, right? So if we go back, COVID had happened, people were stuck at home dealing with a change of routine. A lot of people experienced grief, losing the things that they would naturally do on a day-to-day basis, now being taken
I've been locked
that and being locked exactly,
at home due to the lockdown.
Exactly. And then from there, you know, there was all of this cross-continentally, globally, we were kind of connected for once in our lives. People from Nigeria saw what was going on in the States as far as the Black Lives Matter movement. And then finally in October, we then had NSARS. So as you can imagine, there was so much building up to this very moment, to this very time. And because everyone was coming together, everyone felt the same way. Whether you were marching, donating money, on the sidelines, reposting posts on Instagram or social media, whatever it was that you were doing, mentally it was draining, right? Especially when you're seeing footage on social media or Twitter or wherever it is that you're watching, whatever space it is that you're watching, constantly showing negative imagery of what is going on in your country. So by the time the NSARS took place, people were depleted mentally.
Very interesting design. There was this building of community, especially by female groups. You had this female, coalition of female groups, feminist coalition, and all of that. Young women just like you out there trying to build a community to support that push for reforms within the police and all of that. Tell us about young women trying to create change, building communities together, just like your organization does.
I think it was really just an amazing thing to see. Just not only to see like men come together from different ages, but then just to kind of see how the women all came together to form all these different groups just to help. And you saw that they would raise money for different things. They would raise money for ambulance. They would raise money for things like umbrellas when it was raining, things like raincoats and things when it was raining. And I think that the reason why coalitions were formed is because these things have been going on for a long time. Hundreds of people came out to protest. Most of them have been harassed by police or they know someone that has. And so it just got to a point where it's enough. Like enough is enough. And you know that you cannot do this alone. So you have to ban, exactly.
And then we've had all of this going through the past 1 year. Do you think there's been enough healing mentally? And then community-wise, a lot of people bonding together to think about this NSAS and the benefits that could have accrued from that.
No, I don't think there's been enough healing at all, because after it happened, people had their accounts blocked. People were getting insults and threats from the government. One of the things my organization did was that we had to help someone that actually went into hiding, and he was receiving death threats from people in the police. And they were saying that they would find him and they would kill him. And so this is after the October 2nd shooting, after all of that has happened. So there's no time to heal. It's only been a year. And then we heard that SARS was out. And I remember driving cross states. I was going from Jos to Nigeria. And the same SARS people that were there the last time before they banned SARS with a different uniform. So they're still getting harassed. So it's not enough time to heal.
Yeah, so as we try to round up this conversation, because we don't have enough time, tell us how a lot of people could help overcome this mental torture issues due to police brutality, and how a lot of lessons learned during that period could be helpful in the future.
In the future. So something that Africa's Mental Health Matters did during the NSARS movement was we created a space for group mental therapy, right? And that was a space that we created for people to really talk about how it is that they were dealing with the situation at hand, what it is that they were doing to cope, and then more importantly, being able to provide them resources. So creating an open space and a dialogue for people to really speak their minds, engage gain the resources that they need. A year later, like Ning's already said, people are still healing. People are still trying to fathom how something like this could take place. But I think it's very important that we're open and we're having open conversations like this publicly so that people understand that it's okay not to be okay, right? And the way that you kind of get the resources that you need is by reaching out to mental therapists, looking out for organizations like Africa's Mental Health.
I'm afraid we just have to go because there's no more time. But you've said so much, and I think a lot of people have learned so much. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Somna Sambu.